They erased me from their family group chat as if I didn't exist. At reunions, they laughed under glowing chandeliers, sipping wine I had secretly paid for, while my name was spoken like poison. They thought they were cutting me out, stripping me of belonging. But every plate of food, every sparkling light above their heads, was my invisible signature. I stayed silent, watching them celebrate with my money, thinking I was powerless. But silence is not weakness. Silence is a weapon. And the night they discovered the truth was the night their empire of lies shattered. The first time I walked into their reunion, I thought I had finally been welcomed. The house glowed with warm lights, polished crystal glasses clinked, and the smell of roasted lamb floated through the air. My husband nudged me with a reassuring smile as if to say, "See? They're trying." For a moment, I allowed myself to believe it. I told myself this was the turning point, the night I'd stop being an outsider. But the illusion began to crack almost immediately. My sister-in-law, Claire, swept past me in a sequined dress, whispering loudly enough for everyone at the entryway to hear, "Oh, did we forget to set a seat for Rachel again? Silly me." The chuckles that followed weren't careless. They were sharp, deliberate, each laugh another knife carving me out of their picture-perfect family portrait. I stood in the corner, clutching my clutch like a shield, forcing my lips into a smile. My mother-in-law, Evelyn, appeared moments later, her perfume cloying, her voice sweet but laced with disdain. "You must be used to it by now, dear. After all, you're practically a guest here. A guest with papers, of course." She tilted her head, the words floating through the air like poison dipped in honey. People laughed again, this time with less restraint. My husband shifted uncomfortably but said nothing, and I knew then I was alone in this arena. The party pressed on around me, glasses raised in toasts, conversations flowing with an ease I could never replicate. I drifted from one corner to another, unnoticed, like a ghost haunting a celebration that wasn't mine. The more I tried to blend in, the more obvious my absence became. Not a single photograph included me. When the group gathered by the fireplace for a family portrait, Claire's manicured hand pressed gently but firmly against my arm. "This is just for family," she whispered, her smile fixed, her eyes gleaming with malice. I didn't protest. Instead, I stepped back, my heels sinking slightly into the thick carpet, my chest tightening as the camera flash went off. The image of them, perfect, united, radiant, burned into my mind. And for the first time that night, I wondered, had they already decided I didn't belong before I even arrived? Later, while wandering the empty hallway near the kitchen, I overheard laughter spilling from behind a half-closed door. Curiosity tugged at me. I inched closer, heart pounding. Inside, I saw Claire, Evelyn, and a few cousins huddled around a phone, giggling. "Did you see the way she stood there? Like a lost puppy?" Claire sneered. Evelyn added, "Honestly, the girl should be grateful we let her in the door. She brings nothing to this family." The words hit harder than any slap. I should have walked away. Instead, I leaned closer, my breath catching as Claire scrolled through a glowing screen. "Look at this," she laughed. "She doesn't even know we have a family chat without her. Can you imagine? She probably thinks she's part of us." More laughter followed, cruel and careless. I froze. A secret group chat. An entire world where I was nothing more than a joke, a burden, a parasite. The blood drained from my face and I gripped the wall for balance. They weren't just ignoring me. They had constructed an entire universe where I didn't exist. The rest of the evening blurred. I smiled when expected, clinked my glass when forced, but inside, something sharp and heavy lodged itself deep in my chest. The illusions of acceptance shattered, leaving me with only the echo of their voices. When we returned home, my husband fell asleep quickly, exhaustion claiming him. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Evelyn's words replaying in my head. "You're practically a guest here." My fists clenched under the blanket. If I was only a guest, then why did this house of theirs glitter with chandeliers I had quietly paid for? Why did the caterers send invoices directly to my email, invoices I had discreetly settled under the company name? Unable to sleep, I slid from the bed and opened my laptop. The glow illuminated the room as I pulled up folders of receipts and contracts. Page after page, the truth stared back at me. Every reunion, every anniversary dinner, every glittering party they had flaunted, funded by me, hidden beneath layers of invoices and corporate signatures. They thought I was powerless. They thought cutting me out would leave me crawling for scraps of their approval. But the irony was so thick, I nearly laughed. Without me, their sparkling nights would crumble into dust. As the clock struck 2, I closed the laptop slowly, my reflection faint in the black screen. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt dangerous. And a single question pulsed through my mind, steady and merciless. What will happen when they find out the ghost they mocked was the hand feeding them all along? The invitation never came. Weeks passed, and my husband muttered excuses about how maybe they just forgot, or it's probably a small gathering. But I knew. This time, there was no seat for me, not even a pretense of inclusion. The family reunion came and went, photographs plastered online, a sea of smiling faces framed under twinkling fairy lights. I stared at the images on my screen, searching for a place where I might have stood. There was none. My name wasn't tagged. My existence had been neatly erased, just as they always wanted. For a moment, despair settled over me like a suffocating blanket. I sat in the dark, scrolling, replaying their laughter in my head, each picture a reminder of how thoroughly they had cut me out. It would have been easy to break down, to cry until my eyes swelled shut. But instead, I felt something colder, sharper. They thought they had won, but I was only beginning. I played my part well. To my husband, I acted defeated, murmuring, "Maybe it's better this way. Maybe they'll be happier without me there." He hugged me absent-mindedly, his eyes already drifting toward his phone. I let him believe I had surrendered. I let them all believe it. My silence became my camouflage, my apparent weakness a cloak. Because the truth, the one no one knew, was that I had prepared for this long before they pushed me out. Every condescending laugh, every whispered insult, every moment they made me feel small, I stored it away like currency. And with every dollar I earned, I built something no one could see. A hidden fund, a reserve of power that belonged only to me. The nights were my sanctuary. While they slept, I sat in the glow of my laptop, spreadsheets and contracts scrolling past my eyes. I watched the numbers climb, my investments multiplying quietly. Real estate, stocks, a shell company I had built with a name none of them would recognize. They thought I was just the wife, but I was constructing an empire brick by invisible brick. One evening, as I reviewed the quarterly reports of a small but promising tech startup I had backed, I heard a soft knock on my office door. It was Lily, my husband's younger cousin. The girl who always seemed to hover at the edges of family photos, never quite fitting in. Her eyes were downcast, but there was a sharpness there, a hunger I recognized. "I know it's you," she whispered, closing the door behind her. My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "I know you're the one funding everything," she said, her voice trembling but certain. "I saw the vendor email once when Aunt Evelyn forwarded it to the wrong address. The invoice had your company's name on it. I never told anyone." She paused, biting her lip. "They don't deserve you, but I think I could help you." For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of kinship. Lily had always been the family's shadow, dismissed as unambitious, a failure. Yet here she was, sharper than they gave her credit for, offering me an alliance. "What do you want?" I asked carefully. Her answer was immediate. "A chance to prove them wrong, just like you." I studied her, weighing the risk. Trust had been a luxury stripped from me long ago, but I saw in her eyes the same fire I carried, the same ache of being underestimated. Perhaps this was no accident. Perhaps she was meant to find me. We began to meet in secret. Over coffee, over quiet phone calls at midnight, we built a blueprint of something greater. I showed her how to read balance sheets, how to spot opportunities buried beneath noise. She introduced me to a circle of young entrepreneurs desperate for funding, hungry for guidance. Together, we became more than shadows. We became architects of a future no one could imagine. The more we worked, the more my despair melted into resolve. I wasn't waiting for their approval anymore. I wasn't begging for a seat at their table. I was building my own table. One so vast and unshakable, they would one day look at it with awe and regret. By the time the next family event was announced, I didn't even bother to glance at my inbox. Whether the invitation arrived or not didn't matter. My world had shifted. Their parties, their laughter, their shallow performances, it all seemed so small compared to what I was creating, and yet deep inside a thought pulsed, persistent and sharp. What happens when they realize the empire they flaunted was never theirs to begin with? The answer came to me with chilling clarity. I would no longer wait for their recognition. I would no longer play their game. I would rewrite the rules. Power is sweetest when no one knows you have it. That became my philosophy as the months rolled on. Every caterer, every decorator, every florist who touched the Whitmore family's grand events signed their contracts with a name that looked like any other corporate sponsor. They never saw my face, never knew that the woman erased from family photos was the one greasing the wheels of their business. I wasn't buying their approval anymore. I was controlling their narrative. I watched from a distance as they bragged online about their taste for the finer things. Evelyn in her pearls, Claire draped in designer gowns. They acted like royalty, and the world believed them. No one suspected that their palace was propped up by my invisible scaffolding. They strutted on a stage I had built, blissfully unaware that one flick of my hand could collapse it all. It became a game for me, a long con with layers they couldn't begin to unravel. I set terms in contracts that funneled loyalty back to me. I funded their excesses strategically, ensuring every dollar tied them tighter to my web. They thought they were laughing at me. In reality, I was tightening the strings around their wrists. And then, fate played its hand. One evening, I received a call from the event planner. She sounded flustered, apologetic. "Mrs. Whitmore, I accidentally CC'd your sister-in-law on the invoice. I'm so sorry, it won't happen again." My blood ran cold. For years, I had been meticulous, careful, invisible. But now, a single misplaced email threatened to unravel everything. Claire had seen it. The company name, the payment record, a breadcrumb leading straight back to me. I paced the room, heart pounding, imagining her reaction. Would she laugh, thinking it was some coincidence? Or would she dig deeper, driven by the same cruelty that fueled her whispers? For the first time in a long while, I wasn't the only one holding secrets. They had a clue now, a weapon they could use. Days later, the storm came. We were invited, not me, but my husband, to dinner at Evelyn's house. He insisted I come along, promising it would be fine. The moment I stepped through the door, I knew it was a trap. The room was too quiet, their smiles too polished, like actors waiting for their cue. We had barely sat down when Claire leaned forward, her voice sweet but edged with venom. "Rachel, darling, I couldn't help but notice your company's name on an invoice for the last party. Such generosity. Almost suspicious, don't you think?" All eyes turned to me. My husband blinked in confusion, clearly hearing this for the first time. Evelyn folded her hands neatly, her expression unreadable, though a flicker of satisfaction crossed her eyes. I forced a calm smile. "I like to help where I can. It's nothing." But Claire wasn't finished. "Nothing? Paying for years of reunions, weddings, anniversaries? That's hardly nothing. It almost feels like you've been trying to buy your way into the family." The accusation landed like a stone in water, ripples spreading across the table. Whispers began. Cousins exchanged glances. My husband stiffened beside me, his knuckles whitening around his fork. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but Evelyn raised a hand, silencing the room. Her voice was gentle, but her words were knives. "You see, Rachel, this is exactly the problem. You think money can replace love. You think writing checks makes you one of us, but it only proves you never were." And suddenly I saw it. The smug curve of her lips, the glint in her eyes. She had orchestrated this. It wasn't Claire's discovery by accident. It was Evelyn's design. She had been pulling the strings all along, feeding Claire just enough information, guiding the narrative until I was cornered. It wasn't about me being accepted or rejected. It was about Evelyn keeping her throne. By casting me as the desperate outsider, she reminded everyone that she alone defined what it meant to be a Whitmore. The realization was a punch to the gut. All my careful maneuvering, my secret funding, my silent power, it had played directly into her hands. She had turned my weapon into proof of my guilt. Voices rose around me, each sharper than the last. "She's been manipulating us all this time, and she never said a word. What kind of woman hides behind money?" The judgment was relentless, a chorus of condemnation. My husband finally spoke, his voice trembling. "Rachel, is it true?" I looked at him, at the man who had promised to stand by me, and found only fear in his eyes. Not anger, not love. Fear of what others would think, fear of what my truth meant for him. Something inside me broke. When Evelyn's voice cut through the chaos, it wasn't loud, but it was final. "You don't belong here. You never did. And now everyone sees it." The table fell silent. Every gaze pinned me down, stripping me bare. And in that suffocating silence, I understood. They weren't just cutting me out. They were exiling me. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the polished floor. No one moved to stop me. No one called my name. My husband lowered his eyes, and as I walked out into the night, their laughter followed me, sharp and triumphant. My empire was intact, my secrets still mine, but my reputation, my dignity, those lay shattered behind me, crushed beneath Evelyn's heel. And yet, as the cold air bit my skin, one thought burned hotter than all the rest. If she wants a war, then she'll get one. But it won't be fought on her battlefield. It will be fought on mine. I spent days replaying that dinner in my mind. Every word, every glance, every dagger Evelyn slid beneath her velvet tone. The shame had burned hot that night, but shame doesn't last forever. It calcifies, hardens into something sharper. By the end of the week, my tears had dried, replaced by a dangerous clarity. They thought they had stripped me of dignity, exposed me as desperate. They had no idea I still held the final card. The next reunion was announced, a grand affair at a rented ballroom downtown. I knew I wasn't invited. I also knew they couldn't host it without me. Every vendor, every contract, every champagne bottle chilled in their silver buckets. It all had my fingerprints. So I prepared my stage. If Evelyn wanted a spectacle, I would give her one. On the night of the event, I arrived unannounced, a shadow among glittering lights. Gasps rippled through the crowd as I walked in, the sequins of my black dress catching the chandelier glow. Claire's smile faltered. Evelyn's wineglass paused midair. I didn't wait to be acknowledged. I strode straight to the stage, heels striking like drum beats, the room falling into a stunned hush. "I won't take long," I began, my voice steady. "I only want to thank you all for letting me be part of your celebrations these past 5 years." Confused murmurs spread. Evelyn tilted her head, lips curling. "Rachel, this is hardly appropriate." I cut her off. "Appropriate? You're right. What's appropriate is honesty, and it's time for you to have some." I lifted a folder from my clutch, crisp papers gleaming under the lights. Every contract, every invoice, every payment made for every reunion, wedding, and anniversary you've celebrated. They weren't gifts from fate. They weren't funded by some mysterious benefactor. They were paid for by me. The silence was immediate and suffocating. Gasps turned to disbelief. Disbelief to shock. I flipped through the pages, each stamped with my company's name, each a record of the empire I had quietly built beneath their noses. "And in case you think I forged these," I said, my voice cutting through the stillness, "perhaps someone here can confirm." From the back of the room, Lily stepped forward. Her voice was small but unwavering. "It's true. I've seen the emails. I've seen the contracts. She's telling you the truth." All eyes turned to Evelyn. For the first time, her mask slipped. A flicker of panic flashed in her eyes, quickly smothered, but I had seen it. Everyone had. The silence was deafening, pressing down on the ballroom until it became unbearable. I let it stretch, let it burn. For years they had laughed at me in silence. Now the silence was theirs to choke on. The whispers began slowly like cracks in ice. Is it true? All this time, she paid for everything? The unity they flaunted began to fracture, suspicion seeping into the cracks. Claire was the first to break. "You knew, didn't you?" she hissed at Evelyn. "You let us believe Dad was paying for everything while she—" "Don't be ridiculous," Evelyn snapped, but her voice trembled. "I would never let her buy us. She did this behind our backs." Another cousin spoke up, bitterness sharp. "Or maybe you did know and you enjoyed letting her grovel while she funded our lives." The room erupted. Voices overlapped, accusations flew, fingers pointed in every direction. For the first time, their cruelty wasn't aimed at me. It was eating them alive from within. And then came the twist I hadn't prepared for. My husband. His face was pale, eyes wide as he turned to me. "Is this true?" he whispered, horror in his voice. "All these years? It wasn't me they were praising. It was you?" The weight of his words hung in the air. He hadn't known. Every compliment he had basked in, every nod of approval he'd mistaken as his own achievement, had been mine. The ground beneath him cracked, and with it the fragile balance of our marriage. I met his gaze, searching for understanding, for gratitude, for anything but the emptiness I found there. His pride had been built on a lie, and I was the one who had placed each stone. The arguments around us swelled into chaos. Claire accused Evelyn of deception. Evelyn accused me of manipulation. Cousins accused one another of complicity. The family that had once stood as a fortress was crumbling brick by brick before my eyes. And yet, as I stood there on the stage, the folder still in my hands, I felt no triumph. Only a hollow calm, as if I were watching a fire consume a house I no longer lived in. The shouting slowed, voices dropping to murmurs, then silence. One by one, their eyes turned to me as if I held the verdict, the next move, the final blow. Evelyn's stare was sharp, but the fear hadn't left her. My husband's face was unreadable, caught between betrayal and disbelief. And there I was, standing in the center of the storm, the power finally visible, undeniable. For years, I had been their ghost. Tonight, I was their reckoning. After that night, the Whitmores could not look at me the same way again. The disdain had evaporated, replaced by an unsettling reverence. Suddenly, every cousin wanted to sit beside me at dinners. Every aunt complimented my dress. Every nephew begged for career advice. Claire's tone shifted from venom to syrupy sweetness, and Evelyn, though still sharp-eyed, began to lace her insults with flattery. They didn't exile me anymore. They elevated me. It should have felt like victory. For years, I had dreamed of respect, of acknowledgement, of a seat at the table. Now, I wasn't just seated, I was the center of it. But the adoration was suffocating, a crown I hadn't asked for. They called me the woman who saved the Whitmores, whispered about my brilliance in the same breath they once mocked my presence. At first, I smiled politely, but each compliment carved deeper into my chest. They weren't praising me. They were worshiping what I gave them. My power had become my prison. And soon the rumors began. Whispers slithered through the family, then out into the wider social circle. Rachel bought her way into the Whitmores. Rachel used her money to control them. Rachel didn't belong. She forced her way in. The irony was bitter. When I was silent, they mocked me. When I revealed my power, they mocked me louder. Either way, I was the villain in their story. At one brunch, I overheard Claire laugh to a guest. "Of course we let Rachel pay. She insists. It makes her feel important." My hands shook around my glass of orange juice, and I realized then, this wasn't respect. It was dependency disguised as praise. That night, Lily called me. Her voice was tense. "They're twisting it, Rachel. They're saying you're buying their love. You need to be careful. You're walking straight into their trap." I sighed, staring out at the city lights from my penthouse window. Then maybe I should stop funding them. Let them fall. But Lily's silence told me what I already knew. If I pulled the plug, they would destroy me first, painting me as a monster who abandoned the family she once claimed to support. The realization hollowed me out. This wasn't victory. It was a gilded cage. Still, I wasn't ready for the next truth, the one that struck at the very root of it all. At a rare private lunch, Evelyn let something slip. She was ranting about my interference when her husband, Robert, the patriarch I had always assumed was indifferent, interrupted her sharply. His voice was calm, almost amused. "Evelyn, enough. This was always the plan." The table went quiet. Evelyn's face drained of color, but Robert continued, his eyes fixed on me. "You really think she was the enemy, Rachel? No. I made sure you were pushed, tested, humiliated, because only then would you reveal what you're truly capable of. And now, look, you're powerful. You're indispensable. Exactly as I intended." I stared at him, unable to breathe. His words wrapped around me like chains. It hadn't been Evelyn pulling the strings all along. It had been Robert. He had engineered the cruelty, nurtured the hostility, ensured that my suffering would force me to bare my teeth. "You turned them against me," I whispered, the room spinning. He smiled faintly. "I turned them into tools, and I turned you into a weapon. Every empire needs one." Rage churned in my chest, but beneath it was something colder. Fear. He hadn't just allowed their cruelty, he had cultivated it, all to feed his own image of control. And now he claimed me as part of his design. That night, Lily met me in secret. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "Rachel, he knows about me. Robert knows I've been helping you. He told me to back away or he'll ruin me." Her words cut deeper than any insult Evelyn had ever thrown. My one ally, the only person who had stood by me, was now a target. I reached for her hand, but she pulled back, fear clouding her eyes. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." I watched her walk away, her figure swallowed by the night, and felt the final strand of trust unravel. The Whitmores had stripped me of belonging, of dignity, of peace. Now Robert had stripped me of my last ally. As I stood alone in the quiet, a truth burned in my veins. I had become their queen, their benefactor, their silent ruler. But what is a queen without loyalty? What is power without love? The answer was as clear as it was devastating. Power, in the end, comes with a price, and I was paying it in loneliness. The morning I severed the final cord, the city was still wrapped in dawn. I sat at my desk, my finger hovering over the send button on a single email. It was brief, almost cold, an official notice terminating all sponsorship agreements between my company and every vendor tied to the Whitmore family events. Years of contracts, dissolved in one click. The empire they had paraded as their own was gone before the sun had even risen. The silence afterward was deafening, but it wasn't the silence of shame or exile. It was peace. For the first time in years, my life felt like mine again. No more hiding, no more watching from the shadows, no more being the invisible hand that fed a family intent on starving me of dignity. By afternoon, the calls began. Claire's voice trembled with desperation on voicemail after voicemail. Rachel, please, you don't understand. We have another event coming up. We've already sent the invites. And then Evelyn, her tone dripping with false sweetness. Darling, surely this is just a misunderstanding. We can talk. We're family. Even Robert called once, his message clipped, commanding, reconsider. You don't want to make enemies where you could have allies. But I didn't answer. I let their words stack up like unpaid bills, reminders of how much they had relied on me. I poured myself a glass of wine that night, not their overpriced vintage, just a simple bottle I'd chosen for myself, and watched the city lights without guilt. Still, the question gnawed at me. Was I truly free, or was I just choosing a different battlefield? Revenge had been intoxicating, yes, but it had also consumed me, turning me into someone I barely recognized. My reflection in the window looked both stronger and lonelier. Power had elevated me, but it had also carved me hollow. When the next reunion came, I stayed home. My phone buzzed with message after message, photos of a sparsely decorated hall, cousins whispering about missing dishes, canceled musicians, lights dimmer than usual. Without my hand behind the curtain, the illusion crumbled fast. The Whitmores weren't royalty anymore. They were just a family with no funds, no unity, no backbone. Neighbors gossiped, old friends withdrew. The very image Evelyn had fought so hard to preserve dissolved overnight. I should have felt triumphant watching them drown in their own pride, but instead I felt nothing. It was Lily who found me weeks later, standing outside my office. Her eyes were tired but no longer fearful. They turned on me, she confessed softly. They said I betrayed them. But maybe that was the best thing that could have happened. I looked at her, and for the first time since this war began, I smiled. She hadn't abandoned me after all. She'd simply been forced to play her part. Now she stood before me, stripped of the Whitmore name, just as I had been. And in that shared exile, we found something rare: truth. Together, we dove back into our work. The startup I had backed was beginning to rise, attracting investors who cared about vision, not family name. Lily proved sharper than anyone had ever given her credit for, negotiating deals that left seasoned businessmen stunned. She was no longer the forgotten cousin, she was becoming a force. As the months passed, I rebuilt my world, not on borrowed tables and false smiles, but on foundations of my own making. My office buzzed with energy, laughter that wasn't cruel but genuine, voices that valued me not for what I could give, but for what I could build. For the first time, I wasn't begging to belong. I was choosing where I belonged. Meanwhile, the Whitmores sank deeper into chaos. Without the money, their events shrank into modest gatherings, stripped of glamour. Old wounds surfaced when there were no chandeliers to distract from them. Claire blamed Evelyn. Evelyn blamed Robert. Robert's authority cracked under the weight of his exposed manipulation. The family that once prided itself on unity became a battlefield of whispers and accusations. And yet, they never spoke my name aloud again. Perhaps out of shame, perhaps out of fear. Either way, I had become their unspoken ghost, a reminder of the foundation they had scorned and squandered. One evening, as I walked home from a board meeting, the city lights stretched endlessly before me. I no longer saw them as chandeliers over someone else's party. They were my own stars now, constellations I had earned. The past still ached, yes, but the ache had transformed. It wasn't the sting of rejection anymore. It was the scar of survival, proof that I had chosen myself over their poisoned approval. I paused on the street corner, watching families laugh as they filed into restaurants. A pang of longing struck me, but this time it didn't hollow me out. It reminded me that real connection still existed, waiting to be built, not bought. I whispered into the night as if speaking to the ghost of the woman I used to be. You were never just a guest. You were the one holding the lights. And with that, I walked on, not as an outsider, not as a queen in a gilded cage, but as something else entirely. someone who had burned down a false empire and stepped into her own kingdom. I left the Whitmores behind, but I left them a gift, the silence of knowing that every golden memory they clung to was mine. Their legacy was built on my sacrifice, and their regret would be their inheritance. As for me, I carried nothing but freedom, and for the first time, that was more than enough.